Welcome to Wisdom of the Bible channel. You might have observed how indigenous peoples often resemble those from Asia, especially East Asia. The physical and facial likeness between Native Americans and the Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, Indonesians, and Filipinos is striking and catches the eye. But where do these interesting similarities come from? Thanks to modern technology and genetic research, we can investigate and understand the surprising origins of indigenous peoples, a mystery that has fascinated humanity for a long time. In this video, we will explore their genetics and DNA studies, revealing remarkable ancestral links and their beginnings. Discover how ancient movements shaped the traits we see today, and how these ties help us learn more about human history. Get ready for a thrilling journey through time and genetics, uncovering secrets hidden within our cells. Don't miss the chance to learn about the captivating history of indigenous and Asian peoples and the connections joining these two groups through DNA. The Chinese people include a broad range of individuals and ethnic communities linked to China by lineage, ethnicity, nationality, citizenship, or other ties. Among these communities, the Han Chinese make up the majority, around 92% of the country's total population. In many languages, Chinese often specifically refers to this dominant group. Still, China is home to many other ethnic groups, each with its own culture, traditions, and languages, which this variety shows the nation's deep cultural makeup and adds to its layered identity. China, currently the second most populous country on Earth, stands just behind India in sheer population. Its huge population is noted for high density and wide ethnic variety. Despite that, the Han Chinese remain the primary group shaping national demographics. The Japanese are an East Asian ethnic group native to the Japanese islands. They form about 97.4% of Japan's population, showing their strong presence in the country. Worldwide, it's estimated that around 125 million people have Japanese ancestry, making them one of the largest ethnic groups on the planet. Within Japan, nearly 120.8 million Japanese live in the country, while around 4 million are part of the Nikkei-jin diaspora spread across North America, South America, and other Asian regions. Sometimes, Japanese is used more precisely to refer to the Yamato people, originally from the main islands and forming the bulk of the population. But in other contexts, the term can include different native groups from the archipelago, such as the Ryukyuan people, or Huyan, whose culture and language connect to the Yamato, but are viewed as distinct. Another notable case is the Ainu, who mainly live in Hokkaido and possess unique cultural and historical traits that make them quite different. The Koreans are an ethnic group and nation in East Asia, originating from the Korean peninsula. Most Koreans live in North Korea and South Korea, the two states covering the historical Korean territory. In 2021, it was estimated that around 7.3 million Koreans lived outside the peninsula, creating a considerable diaspora. Along with these Koreans, some are acknowledged as a minority in various nations in East and Southeast Asia, including China, Japan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Uzbekistan. Beyond Asia, large Korean populations have settled in places like Germany, the United Kingdom, France, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. These groups, often organized within community networks, have helped spread Korean culture and build cultural and economic links between the Koreas and the wider world. In the bigger picture, the Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans are seen as the main ethnic groups of East Asia, commonly linked to the idea of Asians on a global scale. When the term Asian is used, it often brings to mind Chinese, Japanese, or Koreans, due to their influence in history, culture, and economics. In recent times, Koreans in particular have gained increased worldwide attention, pushed by phenomena like K-pop, film, cuisine, and more people studying the Korean language. These factors have helped project Korean identity beyond their peninsula, cementing it as one of the most influential cultures in the modern day. A common query in studies of East Asian peoples concerns the genetic links among Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese. Are these groups genetically connected? The answer is yes. Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese share a high level of genetic closeness, effectively making them sibling groups from a biological standpoint. Even though their genetics show notable similarities, there are also unique differences setting them apart. Research shows that more than half of the DNA in Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese comes from a very old population called the Yellow River Neolithic farmers. These people, who once lived in the Yellow River zone during the Neolithic era, significantly influenced the gene pool of modern East Asians. Specifically, the Chinese hold about 77% of their DNA from this ancient group. While the exact numbers for Koreans and Japanese differ by study, both have a large share from the Yellow River Neolithic farmers, confirming their genetic link. Over the centuries, movements of people and cultural interactions also helped shape these genetic similarities. Yet, in spite of these commonalities, the three groups do show genetic contrasts. These differences reflect many centuries of local development, adaptations to environments, and the growth of distinctive cultural identities. You can see these contrasts through certain genetic markers, which highlight the variety within each group. A compelling aspect of comparing Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese is how similarly they relate to their shared roots, especially in the genes linked to the Yellow River Neolithic farmers. Both Chinese and Koreans hold about 77% of their genes from that ancient source, revealing a strong genetic bond between them. This portion, exceeding 3/4 of their overall DNA, underlines their close genetic relationship. Meanwhile, the Japanese also share this same origin but have a slightly smaller piece, about 61%. Though their percentage differs from the Chinese and Koreans, more than half of the Japanese DNA still stems from this ancient population. This factor puts them within the broader East Asian genetic framework. These findings show that DNA from the Yellow River is a key part of the genetic ancestry for all three, forming one of the pivotal ties that link them historically. While the Chinese and Koreans notably share almost identical numbers, the Japanese, with a somewhat lesser amount, still hold a meaningful bond to that ancestral lineage. These details highlight not just the deep links among Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese, but also the cultural and ecological factors that have shaped each group through time. After seeing why the Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese can be seen as genetic siblings, with large percentages of DNA tracing back to the Yellow River Neolithic farmers, 77% for the Chinese and Koreans, and 61% for the Japanese, it's equally vital to look at the genetic elements that separate them. These differences, present in the remaining DNA that completes each group's full genetic makeup, are as essential as the similarities in grasping their variety and history. One interesting point about the Chinese is that besides the Yellow River lineage, they carry about 33% of their DNA from the Southeast Asian Neolithic farmers. This portion is also found in other Southeast Asian peoples, including Indonesians and Cambodians, and further south in Asia, making it distinct from Koreans and Japanese. On the other side, Koreans have less Southeast Asian influence, while the Japanese show even more noticeable differences. For instance, a sizable part of Japanese DNA ties back to ancestors from the Ryukyu Islands and the Jomon people, who lived in those areas prior to arrivals from the continent. These factors give the Japanese special traits, setting them apart from both Chinese and Koreans. Hence, while their genetic likeness points to a shared past and joint ancestry, their dissimilarities reflect the impact of local history and migrations through many centuries. For the Chinese, the link with Southeast Asian Neolithic farmers underscores stronger ties to Southeast Asia, while the Japanese highlight distinct features shaped by island life. Koreans do not have the 33% of Southeast Asian Neolithic farmer DNA found in the Chinese. Meanwhile, a clear distinction between Koreans and Chinese is visible in the gene component labeled Amur Basin Hunter-Gatherers, ABHG, also called Amur River DNA. This type is seen among certain native groups in Siberia and Mongolia, resembling the genetic background of these northern regions. Koreans carry around 17% Amur River DNA, which clearly sets them apart from the Chinese. Yet, there are also genetic shares that link these peoples. About 77% of the DNA in Koreans and Chinese aligns, and likewise 61% for the Japanese, tied to the Yellow River component. An extra point of interest for Koreans and Japanese is that they each have comparable genetic elements, which strengthens their closeness. For the Japanese, even though 61% of their DNA comes from the Yellow River group shared with Koreans and Chinese, they also have two other markers that Koreans also share, the Amur River DNA and the Jomon. the Japanese hold these two markers in levels that affirm their genetic nearness to Koreans. Specifically, Koreans hold around 17% of Amur River DNA and 5.2% of Jomon DNA, drawing these two peoples even closer genetically. If we compare that to Koreans, the Japanese possess about 19% Amur River DNA, slightly above the Koreans' 17%. This highlights their close bond. Moreover, the Japanese have 18.8% Jomon DNA, which is much higher than the 5.2% in Koreans. It's worth noting that Jomon DNA is tied to a native group in the Japanese archipelago, seen as the oldest inhabitants of the region. The Jomon make up a significant part of Japan's genetic heritage. Another intriguing fact about the Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese is that the Amur River DNA, shared among them, has about 43% of its genes coming from the Anatolian Neolithic farmer. This gene pool is also common in Europeans and appears in around 30% to 40% of some Middle Eastern groups, highlighting an ancient genetic link connecting these zones. I hope you liked this video about genetics, where we covered similarities and contrasts in the DNA of Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese. Share in the comments if you already knew these details and the degree of kinship among these communities. As we discovered, more than half of the DNA of these three nations is alike, showing they are indeed sister groups due to their genetic closeness. Indigenous peoples are those who lived in the Americas before the Europeans arrived in the 15th century. The term also applies to groups that keep a clear heritage from pre-Columbian societies. These peoples display a broad cultural variety. While some native groups were mainly hunters and gatherers, others practiced farming and aquaculture. Many formed advanced social structures, building large cities and sometimes running city-states, chiefdoms, kingdoms, republics, confederations, and even huge empires. Nowadays, indigenous peoples still live throughout the Americas, in countries such as Bolivia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Mexico, Peru, the United States, and Brazil. Looking at culture, one can see that cultural patterns in the Americas were often shared in certain geographic areas. In these regions, different ethnic groups adopted similar cultural habits, technologies, and forms of social organization. Mesoamerica, for example, is famous for the way peoples there lived side by side for thousands of years, shaping a fairly unified culture with highly developed farming and social systems. Another example is the North American plains, where, up until the 19th century, various nomadic groups shared a similar life relying heavily on buffalo hunting, along with other shared ways of gathering food. Concerning languages, the range of speech forms among indigenous groups is vast. There are many unique languages and language families, which disproves the idea that all native tongues are alike. In truth, big differences exist among dialects, languages, and their families, showing a linguistic depth that is often not recognized or undervalued. Now, we come to the main theme of this video: genetic tests on the DNA of indigenous peoples. Research into the genetic past of the Americas' native inhabitants is largely done by studying Y-DNA, the Y chromosome, and mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA. Y-DNA is only passed down from father to son, and mtDNA is handed down from a mother to all her children, whether sons or daughters. Neither type goes through recombination, so changes happen only through random mutations over many generations, without mixing of parental genes. Moreover, autosomal markers, called atDNA, are included in such work. Differently from Y-DNA and mtDNA, atDNA intermixes widely and is mostly used to measure genetic mixing. It allows us to look at the average ancestry in the complete genome, making it very helpful for seeing how isolated groups relate in various parts of the Americas. Genetic tests on mtDNA and Y-DNA from native peoples of the Americas, compared with those of certain peoples in Siberia and Central Asia, notably Paleo-Siberians and Turks, reveal a strong genetic connection. They show that groups near the Altai Mountains and Lake Baikal are most closely related to the indigenous peoples of the Americas. This region covers parts of Siberia and Mongolia, standing out as one of the roots for shared ancestry. Also, further proof backs the genetic bond between Native Americans and Northern Asian communities, like the Ket, Chukchi, and Koryak from Siberia. Molecular work and genetic comparisons reveal overlap, not just in the genetic makeup, but also in blood type distributions. For example, Asian haplogroups A, B, C, and D are found in large numbers in the mitochondrial DNA of East Asians, such as the Chinese, and they appear widely among Native Americans. This genetic overlap favors the idea of a migration route across the Bering Land Bridge as a main path that linked both continents. Moreover, certain subclades of haplogroups C and D found in tested Native American groups closely match subclades in Mongols, Japanese, Koreans, and the Ainu. These genetic clues have led experts to propose two primary episodes that shape the gene pool of the Americas. The first is the initial peopling of the Americas, which is seen as the key event for the diversity, mutations, and founding haplotypes forming today's native populations. Among scientists, the leading explanation for this process is the Bering Strait theory. The second big event is Europe's colonization of the Americas, which left a genetic impact on the native peoples. Human settlement of the Americas, or the New World, proceeded bit by bit, originally from along the Bering Sea coast. Research on how certain microsatellites were dispersed, especially in South America, indicates that some native groups have stayed separate since the first peopling of that area. The Nardani groups, including native peoples of Alaska, have mutations in the Y-DNA haplogroup Q. However, they are unlike other native groups in the Americas due to a variety of unique changes in mtDNA and atDNA. These details hint that the earliest arrivals to the Americas and Greenland were likely from later migration waves. Recent insights from atDNA and entire genome studies have offered more clues about how settlement took place and what external bonds the native peoples of the Americas share with others. Research shows that Native Americans are very closely linked genetically to the Paleo-Siberian communities in Siberia, ancient groups from the Malta-Buret culture, and northern Eurasian populations, as well as to ancient Beringians. Native Americans also share a major genetic bond with East Asian groups, including Chinese. A large part of their gene pool comes directly from southern Chinese populations. Sometimes experts call this genetic ancestry Amerindian, and it largely matches Paleo-Siberian ancestry. But it's different from what we call Neo-Siberian ancestry, which follows newer expansions in northeastern Asia and now dominates among modern Siberians. The ancestors of Native Americans took a single path, most likely through Beringia, then expanded across the continent, eventually reaching all parts of the Americas. The exact timeline for this is still debated among researchers. In addition, there is data hinting at possible contact between Native Americans and Polynesians about 1,400 years ago. Recent genetic findings show that Paleo-Indigenous populations, once thought to be separate, share the same DNA as present-day Native Americans. The disputed claim that the first Americans came from Europe through the North Atlantic, based on the resemblance of Solitrean stone tools from the Upper Paleolithic in Europe to Clovis tools in North America, has been disproven. When scientists examined the genome of the Anzac child, linked to the Clovis culture, they found it fits straight into the ancestral line of Native Americans, with no ties to Upper Paleolithic Europeans. The estimates for when the genetic structure of Native American peoples took form vary among researchers, and different theories stretch the timeline by a few thousand years. As the Americas were colonized, Native Americans arose from the blend of a group that split from ancient East Asians. This included populations from places like China, Korea, and other East Asian countries. Scholars don't agree on the exact date when these groups moved from southern China to Siberia's north. There, they merged with a Paleolithic Siberian group called the Ancient Northern Eurasians, who share a deep connection with European hunter-gatherers. From this mix came the native peoples of Siberia, and later the Native Americans, also called Amerindians. In percentages, genetic data indicate that Native Americans carry about 32% to 44% from the Amur River hunter-gatherers, a gene pool also seen in Koreans and Siberians. This portion mirrors the old Siberian ancestry in Native Americans. The remaining part of Native American DNA comes from East Asians, especially those from southern China. This share, usually between 56% and 68%, is linked to the Neolithic farmers of the Yellow River and to Neolithic farmers in Southeast Asia. Interestingly, the Southeast Asian farmers connect to Austroasiatic groups, which show notable similarities with the genes of Native Americans. These two main pieces form the genetic heritage of native populations across North and South America. A multinational study by experts from Brazil, the United Kingdom, Germany, Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia, led by the Molecular Evolutionary Biodiversity Laboratory at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, reached this core conclusion. Various additional investigations also back up the Asian roots of native peoples, highlighting their ties to Asian communities. In the video, I discussed cultural and linguistic parallels between certain Asian and indigenous groups, as well as the genetic findings that confirm this bond. The roots of indigenous peoples indeed go back to Asia. Feel free to comment if you want more content about the genetics of various populations, including lesser-known groups. For those unaware, both the Chinese and indigenous peoples descend from Togarma, great-grandson of Noah. May God bless all of you, and see you soon.